This is the Smart Hashtag 3, and you may be wondering, why would anyone pay more for this when the Hashtag 1 does essentially everything that this does for about 10 to 20 grand less? Well, it's because with the Hashtag 3, Smart has made lots of little improvements that they claim make this a significantly different car to drive. So, with the very first Hashtag 3 Pro registered here in Malaysia, this is the Malaysian Motoring review of the new Smart Hashtag 3 Pro. Now, the Smart Hashtag 3 is the second model from Smart, which is now a co-owned brand between Geely and Mercedes-Benz. As a result, it means that a lot of the design language of the new Hashtag 3 is very similar to what we first saw from the Hashtag 1. So we still get the CyberSparks LED headlights, which on this Pro model only have automatic high beam. In the higher end models, you get CyberSparks LED Plus, replete with matrix LEDs. You also still, mercifully, get the LED daytime running light that stretches all the way across the front of the car, which makes this vehicle look very distinctive at night. But for the Pro model, we've also lost the lighting in the grille, which means that the welcome sequence animation is now a little bit less exuberant than what you'd get if you were to pay a little bit more for the Premium or the Brabus. Now, I keep mentioning the other two variants because this is the entry-level model, which means that in place of a 66 kilowatt NMC battery, instead we get a 49 kilowatt LFP battery. That's good for a WLTP rated range of 325 kilometers, although realistically you need to make some deductions. Mercifully, however, in terms of performance, this is still on par with the Hashtag 3 Premium in terms of power outputs via the motor over the rear axle. In terms of DC charging, it is also broadly similar, with the NMC cars being able to charge it up to 150 kilowatt DC, whereas this accepts up to 130. AC charging, however, is where there is a big difference because the two more expensive models can charge up to 22 kilowatt AC, whereas this car accepts only 7.4, which means those cars can go from 0 to full in 3 hours. This takes a little bit longer than that. Now, the Hashtag 3 is, as I mentioned, the second model from the newly relaunched Smart, which means that, again, it is very similar to the Hashtag 1 in many ways. However, in terms of dimensions, the Hashtag 3 is actually longer, lower and wider than the Hashtag 1, which is why they build this as an SUV coupe, whereas the Hashtag 1 is merely a crossover. Now, as a result of that slightly longer wheelbase, it does also mean that they've had a little bit more space to play around with the design, which is why, as you can see, this car has a slightly more gently tapering rear end, again reminiscent of other SUV coupes. That also pays dividends in terms of aerodynamics because the Hashtag 3 has a coefficient of drag of 0.26, whereas the Hashtag 1 does 0.27, which is why the Pro, Premium and Brabus all have an additional 15 kilometers of range from exactly the same batteries and motor setups that you get in the Hashtag 1. And just like the Hashtag 1, again, there are differences in terms of specifications as you move up the line. The Pro and Premium both ride on 19-inch alloy wheels, but they have different wheel designs, where the Premium gets a slightly more aerodynamic cover face to it, the Pro does not. On top of that, the higher two models also get an illuminated Smart badge on the front fender versus where it used to be on the D-pillar in the Hashtag 1. Now, in addition to all of this, the side profile, the front end, etc., it all looks broadly similar to what you get from the rest of the range, which means getting the Pro doesn't necessarily mean that you're losing out that much. It's just very specific specification differences, which we will get into a little bit later. But I do appreciate the fact that the Hashtag 3 has a very Leaf-looking profile. Even though, again, the overall design language is very similar to what we saw from the Hashtag 1, I will go as far as to say as the Hashtag 3 looks a lot more athletic, especially in the metal. And that is most evident from the rear, because thanks to these proportions and the slightly more accentuated hips of this car, it does look a little more athletic, especially from here. I really love the rear end of this car. Now, because this is the Pro, again, naturally the back end is very clean, but this looks exactly the same as the Premium. So you still get the full width full LED taillights replete with the welcome animation. And it does look very clean, especially because they no longer have a handle or a space for a handle to open the tailgate, because the button has been hidden here in the A. Now, opening that tailgate will reveal the fact that the hashtag 3 is also more practical than what we've seen from the hashtag 1. Because of the slightly longer wheelbase, it means that there is a little bit more cargo room in here for you to put luggage. You can easily put 3, 4, 5 cabin-sized bags in here without too much issue. On top of that, underneath the boot floor, you will find a significant amount of space. More than enough for your charging cables and your V2L system, and potentially whatever else you might have to hide in there, like the sun blinds. Now, the rear seats can be folded 60-40, and at that point you access a little over 1,000 litres worth of space, which makes this car very practical indeed. However, I think this amount of room is just enough, and more importantly, you have a parcel shelf here, which means you can keep your belongings safe from prying eyes. Now, the interior of the hashtag 3 is again very similar to what we've seen before from the hashtag 1, except there are some small design changes. So for example, while we still have the pill style air conditioning vents on the furthest edges of the dash front, we now get 3 circular air vents here in the middle, which interestingly look more similar to a Mercedes-Benz. On top of that, the white interior sort of dash trim has also been swapped out for this lovely gunmetal grey, which I think looks really good but also attracts fewer fingerprints. And of course in the Brabus is a completely different material altogether. But even in this Pro, material quality is still very good. You get lots of lovely choices of materials all the way around the cabin, and it certainly feels very upmarket. One of the most interesting changes for the hashtag 3 is actually in terms of the seat design, because now we get a 2-piece sport seat style affair with integrated headrest. And in the upper end models, you also get ventilation, although on this Pro, you do not. However, you still get electric adjustment on both sides, so that's good. And of course, you still get memory functionality in this seat via the driver profile settings, and so that's all very good. You still get a wireless charger, a couple of USB-C ports, a 12-volt socket down there, a couple of cup holders here, large enough to fit even a large bottle like this, and a phone holder here, which is just big enough to hold my phone. You also get a center console bin here, which is even air conditioned based on whatever temperature it is that you've set, which means you can actually keep drinks chilled here too. And of course, if you want a larger bottle to hide somewhere else, you can also put them in the doors, because the door bins in here are also quite large, big enough to fit a MacBook in fact. Now, in terms of technology, this Pro model is still very well specified. So while you may not have the Beats audio system or indeed the full color heads-up display, you still get the standard large freestanding touchscreen here, which runs the smart integrated head unit system. Now, the interface in this is actually developed by Accolades, which is a local company that's part of a joint venture between Proton and Geely. And because this has been significantly localized, it does mean that it works really well with our market. The maps are all very accurate to what we need, and it also integrates a few unique features which we'll touch on a little bit later. But in addition to that screen, we also get the instrument cluster up ahead via this very small, thin screen, which is certainly better than what we've seen from Tesla, where they integrate everything into the central screen, because you get all of the information that you need right here. And so it's very easy for you to refer to it without having to move your eyes off of your main line of sight. I still get the integrated camera here, which tracks your eyes to ensure that you're paying attention when you're using this car's pilot assist functionalities, and all the buttons for that live on the left side of the stalk, whereas your trip information as well as your media manipulation is done via the right stalk. You also get an illuminated smart badge here, and overall everything in here does look and feel quite nice. Now, one of the things that I quite appreciate about Smarts is that they have very good ergonomics. So although your HVAC controls are integrated in the screen, at least they live in a little ribbon down at the bottom of the screen itself, and they never really go away unless you're using Android Auto. And the steering wheel, for example, can be adjusted in a myriad of different ways to ensure that you can remain very comfortable. The same goes for these seats, which are not only electrically adjustable but also offer a good amount of lumbar support, and side support is actually pretty good as well, which means everything in here is as you would expect. Now, as I've mentioned, the hashtag 3 is longer and wider than the hashtag 1, and that certainly pays dividends back here. With the front seats out in my driving position, I'm about 170 centimeters. I have acres of knee room, and despite that more dramatic roofline, I also have acres of headroom as well. Now, The latter is contributed largely by the deletion of an electric sunblind. In this car, instead, you get a manual sunblind system which you have to fit yourself. Now, I find that to be very lazy engineering because they could have fit the roller mechanism on the front half of the car the way BMW does for the i5 and the i7, and going this route puts it more in line with the BYD Seal and Tesla Model 3, both of which I decry for having this system. However, Smarts are, in this country at least, tinted as standard. Not only are these rear windows very significantly tinted from point of delivery, but so is this panoramic sunroof. So you do enjoy a nice view out while, they claim at least, no heat ingress. But that remains to be seen. Now, aside from that, life back here is still very positive. I get a couple of crotch coolers or rear air conditioning vents mounted very low. I get a USB-C and USB-A port here in the middle. I get very large door bins here. The material quality is just as good as it is in the front. And I also get a deployable center armrest with a couple of cup holders. Now, importantly for families, there are not only ISOFIX mounts on these two front seats, but there's also an ISOFIX mount on the front passenger seat, which means that once you disable the airbag, you can put a ISOFIX mounted chair in the front, which would then allow bulkier rear-facing child seats to be placed there, while adults can still be seated comfortably in the rear. That also means that if you want, you could actually put 3 child seats in here, and an adult could actually fit here in the middle because the floor is nice and flat and this car itself is reasonably wide. But the thing about the Hashtag 3 is, in addition to all this practicality and this and that and the other, the big thing with this is Smart claims that this is now a more agile, more driver-focused model compared to the Hashtag 1. They claim that there have been revisions not only to the way the throttle and the steering works for the driver's input, but also the suspension apparently has been reworked to provide a more engaging drive. So again, in this base Pro model, let's find out. Now, the Hashtag 3 Pro specifically is powered by a 49 kWh LFP battery, which gives it a 325 km WLTP range. Now, it is worth noting that as with every other car, the range that you can get is highly dependent on how you drive. And of course, if you're driving your EV in town, you are able to get a little bit more miles out of it. Now, the thing about the LFP battery in the Pro means that you can charge it to full every single time you charge. And if you are charging via DC fast charger, this goes at up to 130 kilowatts DC. That is significantly faster than other vehicles, such as the BYD Atto 3 or Chery Amoda E5, for example, that max out at about 88 kilowatts. However, there is a penalty to pay in terms of AC charging, because while Smart is very proud of the fact that their Premium and Brabus cars can charge at 22 kilowatts AC, allowing you to charge from dead to full in just 3 hours, unfortunately the Pro only does 7.4, which means that you're looking at quite a lot longer than that, even though it's a slightly smaller capacity. Now, it's not all doom and gloom though, because yes, the range is not as great as the other cars, and yes, the charging is also not that good, but at the very least, there is no performance deficit. And so this Hashtag 3 Pro will rocket from 0 to 100 in the same speed as a Hashtag 3 Premium, which means at least you'll be able to save face in a traffic light drag race. And in terms of driving dynamics, the Hashtag 3 again is built to be even more engaging than the Hashtag 1, which it would certainly have to be because that wasn't a particularly engaging car to drive. Now, obviously the Hashtag 3 benefits from being lower and wider, and that improvement does bring some benefit when you're out on the real world. So for example, thanks to the longer wheelbase, it does mean this car has a slightly more settled ride than what we saw from the Hashtag 1. Additionally, because this car rides on slightly larger rolling stock, they've managed to figure out a way to make this suspension just feel a little bit more sophisticated. Now, what that essentially means is this is not a driver's car. This is not going to light your heart on fire the way BMW iX2 or in fact even an iX1 can for that matter. Instead, this is a nice balance between driver engagement and comfort, because the secondary ride in this car feels like a proper European vehicle. It's not uncomfortable, but it also doesn't feel too floaty. And I do get enough feedback to the steering wheel that when I'm not on a motorway and I'm trying to take in some slightly more interesting roads, I do have some degree of confidence in this car to keep me on the straight and narrow. Now, if you're not a hooligan, and if you're watching a Hashtag 3 review, I can't imagine you are, you will appreciate the fact that this car is built with the same kind of quality that we saw from the hashtag 1. Which means that in addition to this exuberantly styled interior, the more important factor is everything is screwed together really well. Now, at the time of filming, we've covered 700 kilometers. We've still got another 200 kilometers to go, which means we would have covered about 1,000 by the time we're done. And throughout this process, the only things that have rattled in this cabin are stuff that we've put in it, which includes, but is not limited to, myself. As a result, there is this overwhelming sense that this is an upmarket vehicle, which is of course in line with how Smart sees itself and how it wants its customers to see the brand and its products. On top of that, because the hashtag 3 is billed as more of a GT car, it also means that there have been some improvements towards refinement. Yes, the tires are exactly the same as what we saw from the hashtag 1, specifically Dunlop SP Sport Max tires, around 19-inch alloy wheels for both the Pro and Premium, but there has been some work done to minimize the amount of road raw that intrudes into the cabin. And that really does pay dividends when you're traveling longer distances like I am now. Additionally, the more slippery design of the hashtag 3 also means that when you are driving at slightly higher speeds, motorway cruising speeds for example, there is a lot less noise intrusion into this cabin. And that just makes everything in here feel a lot more comfortable. Now, I'm not doing this drive alone, which means I've had the opportunity to sit in all of the passenger seats, and I am not too embarrassed to admit that I actually slept for an hour in this car. For context, I cannot sleep in cars. This is not a word of a lie. So if you ask me, that means that this car does pretty well. And of course, when I am back in the driver's seat, I appreciate the fact that I have excellent visibility all around. The glass house is huge. I have a nice commanding seating position, and I have a great view out the front as well. Although I would have liked that view to have been interrupted by a heads-up display. But my seating position is great, all the controls fall very easily to hand. It's very nice to be in here, and because Smart is a premium brand, they do not believe that safety should be a luxury, which is why even this hashtag 3 Pro comes chock full of active safety features. Smart bills this as level 2.5 semi-autonomy. This is largely due to it being able to do more than what you'd normally expect from, say, a Proton X50. Now, what that means is in addition to things like autonomous emergency braking, adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, a 360-degree camera, and la-di-da-di-da, it also means that this car comes with things like emergency lane intervention. So for example, if you're about to steer into something that you're not supposed to, the car will steer you away from it. It also comes with a lane change assistant, which is normally a feature that is reserved for cars that are twice, even 3 times the price. Which means that to offer that in something that is ultimately 175,000 ringgit is excellent. Of course, you would gain matrix LED headlights if you were to step up further in the range. You'd also gain that heads-up display I mentioned earlier, and the Beats audio system, and the ventilated seats, and dual-zone climate control. But the bottom line is, even this hashtag 3 Pro is still a premium experience. And at 175,000 ringgit, it also represents absolutely excellent value. Because for around that money, you could end up getting into, sure, a Tesla, but that's a mass market brand and it doesn't have access to the chargers the way this car does. The same can be said of BYD. The Seal is a very good car, but it is a mass market brand, which means in the car park or indeed in your garage, on your driveway, it simply will not command the same sort of attention that a vehicle like a Smart hashtag 3 would. And so if you put all of this together, what you end up with is an excellent value luxury vehicle. This is what I would define as attainable luxury. Because while you get a lot of luxury appointments, it is not so painfully expensive that it's simply out of reach. On top of that, Smart has very cleverly balanced the things that it has given you and things that it's taken away. And as a result, it means you just end up in a much better packaged vehicle. If you were to compare this to vehicles like the BMW iX1 or even the Mercedes-Benz EQA, you get a much more complete package here. And if you compare this to vehicles like the new Mini Countryman SE, well, I don't know about you, that's a funky looking car, but I think this is funkier still. And of course, there is the fact that you have more screens, there are more buttons, it operates a little bit more like a conventional vehicle, which means that that might be a bit more appealing to you. So would I recommend a Smart hashtag 3, or specifically a hashtag 3 Pro? Absolutely. I think these cars are fantastic. I think it looks great. It's just that there are a few bits and pieces that I think Smart has cheaped out on in order to achieve that price point. Removing things like dual zone climate control and the light bar in the front, I think is just a little bit mean. On the other hand, if you are more interested in a vehicle that drives perhaps a little bit better, a bit more rewardingly, then you might prefer something like the BMW iX2, because while that has a more challenging design, as I'd put it, it does at least drive like a BMW for better or worse. And of course, if you have no sense of humor or any kind of imagination, you could buy a Mercedes-Benz EQA or EQB. I'm told that there are great discounts on those at the moment. I can't imagine why. But if you ask me between those three premium options, it is the hashtag 3 that gets my vote. This is an incredibly well-packaged vehicle, and I can only imagine that package only improves when you go further up the range. In any case, it has been our unusually extensive review of the Smart hashtag 3 Pro. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can join our new WhatsApp channel. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.